Hi, everyone. Welcome to the School of Reinvention podcast. I am your host, Roger Osorio. I'm a reinvention coach and author of the book, The Journey to Reinvention, How to Build a Life Aligned with Your Values, Passions, and Purpose. I'm here with Dr. Michael Gerharz, who helps leaders across the globe to find the right words and make a bigger impact. He's the author of The Aha Effect and the Leaders Light the Path Manifesto. His blog on the art of communicating has more than 900 published posts, and he's also the host of the Irresistible Communication Podcast. Michael, thank you so much for taking time to be here. You know, the topic of communication, I should say the skill of communication, has been so important on my journey to reinvention and many of the other folks that I've interviewed on this podcast. And so, you know, to be able to talk to an expert on this topic, pick your brain a little bit, I think will help our listeners tremendously.
Thanks, Roger. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about, before we, dive into expert mode and really start tapping into your expertise, tell us a little bit about how you got to this point in your career, how you found your way into communication, your journey into building this career.
The short answer would be out of sheer frustration.
Okay.
Frustration with all the great ideas that had been thrown into a trash bin because nobody knew how to communicate them properly. So originally, I'm a computer scientist, right? That's where my PhD is in. Actually, it's in communication systems. So mobile communication is where I did my PhD on. We did a lot of work with industry. Nokia was the shooting star back then when I was working on that. And I've seen so many great ideas at conferences, during meetings, that just didn't make the cut because nobody knew how to communicate the core of that idea in a way that compelled others and that made others appreciate the brilliance of that idea, despite being all of them involved people being brilliant themselves, brilliant researchers, brilliant engineers, developers, managers. And yet nobody knew how to surface that brilliance. And I always thought that was a pity, that there was much more potential in these ideas. If only we cared to make a little more effort in finding the right words, and if only we didn't spend as much attention to all the complaints about this is just how we do it in this industry, this is research, so it's got to be serious, and so that's just how we do it here, and just don't pay as much attention to that stance and start looking for different ways. And that's how I started to write my blog, initially in German. And that's how people got kind of stumbled upon my take on a different way of communicating, one that's more clear and to the point. And that's when they started reaching out. And so everything grew basically from there. And today, here I am.
Yeah, I can appreciate that frustration. I work with aspiring entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs all around the world. And a big part of my work with them is helping them prepare for their first pitch, to communicate that idea effectively. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with this. Entrepreneurs don't get a lot of time to present an idea. So if you're lucky, you get a 5-minute pitch. But there's an event that I do where it starts with a 1-minute pitch. So you have 60 seconds to get an idea across and hopefully inspire someone in the room to join your team to work with you on that idea. And, a lot of things that you're talking about here play a role, because I always tell people, the idea is important, yes, but how you communicate it, given how little time you have, is really what's ultimately going to sell the idea, make or break the idea, I should say. And I've seen it so many times where people, I think like, wow, that's a great idea. And it's partly because I heard them talk about it before they got up on stage. But then when that 1-minute pitch was delivered or that 5-minute pitch was delivered, it just didn't do it justice. It got too complex, too many details. And then we lost the value, we lost the impact, we lost maybe the aha moment in all of that.
Yeah. And it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, these people burn for what they do. They have a burning passion inside themselves, and they love what they do, and they deeply believe in that thing to have the potential to change the world. And part of the reason that they believe so deeply in this is because they care for the details. Yeah. They care for getting this right. They spend nights fixing that bug and finding that last percentage of optimization. And so when when we have to get on that stage to pitch the idea, and now are faced with a situation of only having like those 5 minutes, we somehow struggle to let go of all these details that are so near and dear to our heart, that have cost us so much blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
And so that focus just hurts in that moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you say, that's kind of just the bitter truth and the bitter pill that we've got to swallow, because on the other side of the room, there's an audience, and they don't care so much about all the sleepless nights that we've been through, but much more about what this idea brings into their world and how it would improve their world or their business.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction we're going to talk a lot more about later. This idea that, focusing on the audience, what it means to them, and how, so many times I go through my writing when I write something, and I've learned this over the years, because I absolutely used to definitely commit that crime. I would write all those details that were important to me because there was a lot of pain in that. So I thought that needs to be in there. There should be a paragraph about that. And as I've, grown and I've learned more about writing and writing more effectively and more concisely, it's where I've discovered, I always call it trimming the fat. And I know myself. I know I'm going to write that in the first draft. But when I go give it that second look, I start chopping away. I go, that paragraph was for me, not for the audience. Yeah. So we're going to get rid of that one. Yeah. This one's for the audience. We're going to keep this one. This one's for the audience, but could be shorter, and that's how I revise these days.
Yeah, and that's an important point, right? You don't have to get it right at the first take. So you don't go on that stage just with your intuition and make it up on the spot. You have like weeks or at least days to prepare for that. And just it's okay to just write everything down at first, but then take that step back and really have a critical look at that and ask yourself that question: is that for me? Or is that for the audience? Because, as you mentioned, you're not giving the presentation for yourself. You know everything already. You're the expert already. You're giving it for the audience, right? And the big question is, what's the gap for them? What is it that they need to see? Mm-hmm. Not exactly in order to get immediately on board and immediately buy the idea on the spot. But first of all, to make them curious, to open that door for them to start into a conversation and ask us after that 1 minute or 5 minute version to have that longer conversation.
And that's an interesting point you just made there, because it's also a matter of being very careful which doors you do open, like which curiosities do you tickle. Because if, I've helped some people when they're going over their pitch, and there's a sentence that they put in there, very lean. It's not a lot of time dedicated to this idea, but I think, like, as I'm hearing it, I go, that opens, the proverbial can of worms, because now you've got me thinking about that one line, and I'm not listening to the rest of what you're saying. So you also have to be careful. Which curiosity do you poke? Which curiosity do you inspire in me? Is it the one you really want right now in these 5 minutes, or is that a later curiosity that you'd like for me to talk about? Have you run across that where you have to choose between what curiosity to inspire in people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, attention is such a tricky beast, right? Because attention is something that works very different than we might intuitively think. It's not that, we have that open mind that records everything. Yeah. that we consume, like working like a video recorder that records everything we see, everything we hear, and that we could then tap into just in a true to the spoken word variation. But in truth, it's a very narrow scope of the reality. There are very fascinating experiments there. One is called the door study, where they have made an experiment on the street, and people and some people were asked for the way to the station, to the train station. But while the person was busy explaining that way, two other people with a door carrying a door crossed their path, and then they would exchange the person asking for the way and the other person explaining that path wouldn't even recognize. More than 50% of the participants wouldn't even recognize. And so that means that their attention was fully focused on figuring out that way and finding the words to explain it to the stranger, so that there wasn't even a capacity for them to recognize that they now were speaking to a totally different person with wearing a different jacket, having a different voice, different hairstyle. Wow. That is real. That's called attention blindness. The fact that, well, when we can only pay attention, conscious attention to one aspect of reality. And if we compel our audience, as you say, to pay attention to one specific aspect, that their attention is consumed with that, and there's not much space left for other aspects. A common pitfall is, for example, the way that slides are often used, right? Which is kind of an attention trap, which invites, just by the pure amount of words that are on those slides, it makes an invitation for the audience to read those slides.
Yes.
But while they are reading, they cannot listen to you because we have only one attention. We can only put it at one place. And so that makes for a very difficult conversation with the audience, because the audience is a constant struggle to where to put that attention.
Mm-hmm. And I guess in the case of the slides versus listening to the speaker on stage, the slides are the easier one probably to, if I have to pick which one to give my attention to, that's probably the easiest one. The words aren't moving.
Yeah,
I mean, I can go at my own pace. I can read it as fast or as slow as I want.
Exactly, and especially it can read faster than you can talk, so I can just read ahead. And so
exactly.
when I'm done reading, I can just move over to planning my next vacation or catching up on Instagram.
That's right. Now, in that study you mentioned, that door study where people's focus is so much on getting the directions that they want, I can't help but also notice, and I wonder if this has anything to do with part of the discoveries in the study, that the conversation was about the listener, because the listener needed that information. So I wonder, are they more engrossed in that conversation and focused because it's about them, it's about something that benefits them, versus if I was just telling you my story, like on the street, if I just stopped to tell you my story, versus giving you directions to where you need to go next?
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly right that experiment was specifically designed kind of to trick the attention away from the other person. So if there was no map involved and I would have been looking at you, it probably wouldn't have worked. Or not as well. Although there are very interesting experiments with that kind of relationship too. Just head over to YouTube and make a search for attention blindness, and you'll be blown away by the experiments that you see. But on the flip side of that is, of course, that the better you are at what kind of listening and paying attention to what's around you and being in the moment, truly being present rather than having your mind wander in all directions and going down every path that the other person throws at you. So the better you are at listening and being present in the moment, the harder it will be to kind of trick you into that attention trap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what you just said about being present, that makes me think about something that has served me so incredibly well on my journey to reinvention. And in almost in any work that I do, whether I was a teacher, an executive coach, a speaker on stage, or networking at an event after speaking, one of the most consistent pieces of feedback I've received, and it's not by accident, it's because I do this intentionally, is that when people talk to me, they say that they feel that the level of attention I'm giving them is such that it's as if they are the only person in the room. And I love that, because that's my intention. That's fully my intention. And of course, that level of listening and that level of communication is way deeper. We don't notice anything else going on around us. There's people that might be trying to get into our conversation and interrupt. I'm not even looking. Like, I'm so laser focused on them and they're laser focused on me. And it makes our connection so strong. You don't forget those conversations. You don't forget those moments as easily. And I feel like when, again, a lot of our listeners are reinventing themselves. They're moving into a new domain. And I feel like when you're moving into a new domain, every little bit of differentiator that you can bring, because you may not have the relevant skills, the requisite, experiences, whatever it might be. I think attention is one of the most powerful skills, gifts, that you can bring to a new party. Being able to give someone all of your focus.
Yeah, and the irony is that when we recognize that in others, that they are truly paying attention, that they care for what we have to say, that's when we start paying attention to them. That's when we start noticing them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I guess one of the differentiators what makes you so good at that is that you don't take the other person's time. You give your time to them. You show up to be helpful and be interested in their time. Yeah. And that dynamic changes if we're kind of the sneaky salesperson who's just there to take advantage of the other side. Who's just there to take their time, then they have much greater difficulty in paying attention to what it is that they are actually saying. Mm-hmm. But when you show up to actually be helpful, pay attention to what they have to say because you're curious about that, truly and genuinely curious, that's when they notice that, that person is truly present right now, right here.
That and I appreciate you saying that, because I've never actively thought about, so what is it that maybe drives or has inspired that behavior, that decision that I've made on my part? And I'm thinking back, you just made me think about an experience that I had a long time ago when I think I was 15 or 16, and I went to the local soccer team's practice. So I live in New Jersey, and we have back then they were called the New Jersey Metro Stars. Now they're the Red Bulls, part of Major League Soccer. Now, this was back in, I think it was the late 90s or early 2000s. And actually, you might appreciate this. I don't know if you follow football, of course, as it's known in Europe and around the world. But Lothar Matthäus, one of the great German players of all, World Cup winner, all of that. So he played in New Jersey for the Metro Stars, for that team. And I went to a practice where I got to, it was his first practice at the team. And I was there. And this was back when there was no security to get in. In fact, the team didn't even have a facility. So you can just get right into the facility, to where they practiced, a field they rented on a university's campus. So it was really easy to get on. And I would go watch practice. And I remember I went to go meet him, and well, this part wasn't so good. He completely ignored me. So anyway, that's beside the point. So he completely ignored me. I stuck my hand out to shake his hand, and he just looked at it and walked away. One of the other players though noticed, and this is actually my favorite player all time when I was young, Tabaré Ramos, an American, but originally Uruguayan. And he came up to me, and he noticed that happen. And I think he just kind of wanted to make up for it. And he gave me this level of attention. He started talking to me about his dad, and his dad being a former professional and all of this stuff. And I never really thought about this until maybe a couple years later, where I thought, I wonder why he did all of that. I mean, I had already talked to him before, but he really came and gave me. And this level of attention, I think he did partly to make up for what I had experienced. However, what I took away from that as I started becoming an adult was the fact that he gave me that attention. And to your point, what you said earlier is that when I go into a situation, I'm there with the intention to give my attention, not to take something from the other person. I want to give my focus, my attention, myself. And I think, and thinking back to this experience, I think that was one of the early inspirations to that. That feeling, that memory. I mean, we're talking, almost 30 years ago. That moment is tattooed in my brain. I still remember where I was, the buildings around me, everything, literally where we were standing. I can still picture that moment exactly. And that goes to show how important that is, right?
Yeah, and the point is not that you're in the top priority spot of their attention all the time. Yeah. But just when you're in the same room together at the same time, you are. You know very well that this is a busy person. He's a top player, and so he's very busy, and he needs to spend his attention all kinds of places. But he cares to take that 2 minutes that made your day. And in those 2 minutes, he wasn't anywhere else. He was totally in the moment. Yeah. And that's what people appreciate, and that's what kind of separates some of the best leaders from the more average leaders. That everyone knows that they're busy and that they have a full calendar. But when they take the 2 minutes to listen to your pitch, or even to listen to your idea, or just meet you in the elevator, they are fully present in the moment, and they give you the impression that right in that moment, nothing else matters.
Yeah. And it is such a powerful effect. And like I said, 30 years later, almost 30 years later, I still remember it as if it was yesterday, and I can go right back to that moment. The other thing that, what you said made me think about is when we're pivoting into entrepreneurship, chances are we have some sort of idea that we want to bring to life. And we can get so caught up in that idea. We're worried, is this idea good enough? Is it not? And everything is about whether my idea is good enough or not. And one of the things I've discovered is that those entrepreneurs, early entrepreneurs who are able to focus on the customer and the customer's problem over their idea, meaning in all conversations and everything, they just seek to serve. They connect with their customers at a different level, and they move and operate with less anxiety, less stress, because I think that they're not in their head so much. They are in their customer's head. They are worried about their customer. And this is something when you and I had our prep call, you talked a lot about when we are in our customer's head, when we're thinking about them and their needs and their problems and their challenges, the entire dynamic and potential for communication changes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Actually, it makes everything so much easier, right? When you don't have to persuade the other side, the customer, of the brilliance of their idea, but you can just resonate with them because you exactly understand what their struggles are, what their aspirations are, what they desire to have in their life, and how that looks like. So if you have a good understanding of that, you can just speak their language and speak to their ideas rather than trying so hard and pushing so hard, making them want something that they have no clue about what's the use of that. So and rather than that, making something that you understand from having conversations with them, like you said, being in their head, making something that you know that they crave, and then you can just. Then actually communication becomes an easy task, right? It basically means when you actually build that thing, it merely means telling a true story about the things you've made.
Yes.
And because they have been derived from what you understand about your customer, it will almost naturally resonate with them.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like this advantage is critical especially when you're reinventing yourself and you're moving into a domain where you don't have experience, where you don't have the typical skills that your competitors or other people, and it doesn't even have to be entrepreneurship. Honestly, it could be you're going into a new industry and you're pursuing a job. You're competing against people who've been in that industry all their lives, all their careers. And how do you separate yourself? And it sounds like, because of what we're talking about here in terms of the power of communication, especially when we focus on the other person and our attention and all that could be a significant advantage. Actually almost an unfair advantage, but the good kind, right? The good kind of unfair advantage where we can really distinguish ourselves and make ourselves memorable, hard to forget, especially, when you may only have 5 to 10 minutes to convince a hiring manager that you are the person they should bet on versus the one that's coming in with 15 years of experience, that you, new to this field, are the one that they need.
A common misconception that I see entrepreneurs making is that they approach those conversations with the aim of appearing that they've got everything figured out already. Mm-hmm. But most smart people don't care for that at all, because they are smart precisely because they know that actually no one's got it figured out completely. Mm-hmm. So they are much more interested in your capacity to figure it out eventually along the way, and to be able to ask the right questions and then to tweak it as you go. And just giving that impression that you care not for being right initially with your initial idea, but of figuring it out eventually, getting it right eventually. That's what like VCs or early investors are much more interested in.
Mm-hmm. I think about my approach to speaking, and it's this idea of when I read the audience maybe I ask a few questions, or perhaps I arrive in an event and I had an idea for a talk that I had already intended to bring. Maybe the organizers wanted this. But then I'm in front of the audience. I've asked them questions. I've hung out there before the session, so I got to know some of the attendees, and I got a feel for the needs, and the needs are different than what I had prepared. One of the things that you just shared, which I think is just, it makes it not just more fun, but it's more fun, and I think it's easier. Is I just respond to the audience. Like I go, you know what? I think what we need to talk about today is this topic. So my slides are this. So let's just put the slides away. Let's just, because these slides are not going to help us today. But let's talk about this topic because this seems to be the issue at hand. Or maybe there's a lot of questions coming in, all very similar, and they have very little to do with the agenda I had for that session.
Yeah.
Pivoting in that moment, I feel like I could see why someone with less experience in speaking, of course, would be very nervous about that. I haven't prepared for this other topic, and I don't have all my ideas organized. I don't have all my slides and my script and this and that, my notes, so on and so forth. But at the same time, I feel like that's actually what makes that moment so beautiful and so actually in a way more comfortable, because it just became superhuman. This is not it's very human now. It's not this, I have prepared a show and I'm going to put on my performance. It's no longer about the performance. It's about this human interaction with the audience right there in the moment, live. Here we go. You're asking questions. Let's talk about this right now. And I love those moments. And it's really funny because I think some people have come up to me like, how are you so comfortable in those moments when basically the plan just went out the window? And I go, actually, the plan is almost a little harder. That for me, I could become more nervous about. But when I'm just having a conversation with the people in front of me, oh my gosh, that's when it becomes easy. Even if it is 400 of you.
And to me, it looks like it's a pattern for you, right? Because it's the same mechanism at work here, because you're not showing up to show off. Mm-hmm. You're showing up to be helpful because you care for the questions that the audience has. And so you step off the hero's pedestal and leave it to them. Mm-hmm. You care for what's on their mind. And many people who are standing on the stage are so consumed with putting on that great show, making themselves appear as the hero of the show, or at least their startup idea as the hero of the show, when it's never about that, when no audience whatsoever ever shows up because they're looking for another hero, for a new hero, because they already got one. It's themselves, right?
Yes.
And if you help them become even better at being that hero of their life, that's when they pay attention to you. Yeah. And that's what you're apparently giving them. And that's a way more, in my experience, it's a lot more comfortable to be in that place when you don't have to make that great impression, but you show up as the mentor to help them. You're the expert, and everyone knows that. And you don't need them to cheer for you. It's much more that you cheer for them. And that's a much easier task.
Yes.
You don't have to be that nervous to just cheer for the audience, right?
And I feel like the success rate is a lot higher because you are addressing exactly what is on the mind of the audience, what they're thinking, versus when I'm taking a guess, and maybe an educated guess because I've spoken to organizers. Obviously, I know the theme of the conference, so on and so forth. It is a good educated guess. However, I mean, imagine right there in that moment, everyone's asking the same question. You know what? Let's just answer this question. Everyone's going to walk away with value.
Yeah. But here's a word of caution, because it's easy to mistake that advice as meaning that you wouldn't have to prepare at all, right? Just show up as yourself and just wing it because, that makes you human. I don't think that's a good recommendation, especially if you're not experienced in doing this thing. Yeah. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I think you should show up super prepared. Mm-hmm. It's just not that you need to, that you should prepare in a way that you're so stuck to the way that your slides work that you couldn't deviate or couldn't react to a different kind of audience. But just being prepared and being also prepared to what kind of questions could surface from the audience there. Yeah. That helps you to feel more comfortable in that moment. And if you've encountered a lot of those questions before, then there's no reason to be nervous. For example, Neil deGrasse Tyson once said in an interview, because I mean he's that guy who shows up for kind of every scientific issue, and he's been called by the television station, and he just shows up and appears to be so knowledgeable and so confident, regardless of what question it is. So, and he was being asked, so how does he do that? So how can you show up regardless of the question?
Yeah.
And he says, well, I never show up although it appears that I'm spontaneous, but I never am spontaneous. I show up being prepared 10x. I have prepared for 10x the amount of questions that the journalist would ever be able to ask me. And then it's a very high probability that the question that they are going to ask me is among those that I have prepared. And I have very likely written any answer that I ever give on television down on a paper, in a blog, in an article previously. I'm super prepared. But that's what makes me spontaneous. I can juggle those balls because I have practiced them so much beforehand.
Yeah, that's, well, first of all, that's a very important caution to make, that we really have to be careful that we don't cross the line into just winging it every time. And, to your point, I heard this from a mentor, a speaking mentor, who shared with me that, you have to make sure that, because I said the same thing about him. When he's on stage, I always thought, wow, you just sound like you can talk about whatever question is asked, whatever happens in the moment. You can dance so easily in that moment. You can follow the lead so quickly and effortlessly. How do you do that? And one of the things he shared with me, it's knowing your topic. So he called it knowing your topic inside and out. You can't get up there and not know your topic inside out. You have to know it inside out, which I think is the equivalent of knowing all the questions that could possibly be asked. And then in that moment, no matter what is asked, however the question is assembled, it is probably, if it's not a direct question that you've prepared for or a topic it is probably some sort of combination of different pieces of knowledge that you have. And you need to just, in the moment, mix them up and then put them to work for you. But you have to know, you have to have all those pieces laid out. You have to have all of those pieces inside of you so that you can rearrange them as needed and build the proper response that sounds then, of course, to the audience like, oh my gosh, it just came up with that in that moment. In a way, he probably did come up with it in that moment, but it was not completely, organic in that moment. He had already done that practice, and he just brought together different ideas in that moment. Actually, this also makes me think of, I don't know if you have followed basketball, Kobe Bryant, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. He talked so much about being so good at the fundamentals. He goes, when you're good at the fundamentals, that's what makes him look so good in any moment that happens. He's like, I can't practice for every moment, but I can practice the fundamentals so well that no matter what the moment is, I can put together some combination of my fundamentals to respond to that moment, which then, of course, looks epic. And we all worship it and think wow, that was the most creative thing in the world. Well, and it was, but it wasn't just something that came to him magically. It was built upon the foundation of these fundamentals.
Yeah, and when you're so good at the fundamentals, you also know when to break them, right? When to do it differently. When the time has come to finally give that chance shot. A chance.
Exactly. So let's, we're talking about entrepreneurs. We're talking about, effective communication and also being able to separate yourself from others, become memorable, and give your attention. But let's talk about another aspect of communications that you and I talked about, and it's, articulating our ideas. One of the things that I have found working with first-time entrepreneurs is that there is a hesitancy to share their ideas. They for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's just because it's nerve-wracking. They're nervous about sharing their idea because they just maybe don't have experience speaking or whatever it might be. But the other reason I hear a lot is that, people are afraid that their ideas will be stolen, whatever it is. Bottom line is, whatever the reason is, it stops them from sharing their ideas. And one of the things you shared with me was this idea that, the more we talk about our ideas, the more ideas can develop, and that communication actually plays a big role. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, let's have a little bit of empathy for those people, right? Because
Yeah.
it makes so much sense. I mean,
Yeah.
you've spent so many hours and days and weeks, sometimes years, invested it in those ideas that, well, this is almost like the most precious thing for you.
Yes.
And just the mere thought of having someone steal that, well, that makes you really nervous, and I can sympathize with that. And also that other aspect that you shared. I mean, as long as we just keep it for ourselves, just in our minds, just circling that idea, there's that potential, right? The potential future and the potential impact that it has. But the moment that we share it, that's an experiment, right? That's when we kind of have to face the truth. Does it really resonate with people? Mm-hmm. Does it really make the impact? That's when it potentially breaks down. And that's a frightening thought. Mm-hmm. I think we can all, or at least I can very much relate to that. But then again, I think it's again true, something that we mentioned earlier, that it's not about being right initially, but getting it right eventually. No first idea ever is perfect, and no first version of a product ever nails it. It's always the second, or sometimes the 10th, sometimes even like in Dyson's case, the thousands or fourth thousandth version of the product that actually nails it. Mm-hmm. And so that's just the way that some of the best products out there have been built. And what you gain by communicating about your idea is that, and it forces you to face the truth before the thing is built, that you have the potential of getting people's reactions, getting a feedback as to whether that product would even resonate with people before it's actually built. Mm-hmm. And so based on the feedback that you get, you can make much more informed decisions about which ways you need to optimize it or tweak it, or which features need to be prominently placed, which could probably be removed. Yeah. I actually like Amazon's take here a lot. I'm not sure whether they do it still, but at least they used to start a project with a press release, an internal press release. So before a project is greenlit, you need to write the press release. And unless that press release is compelling enough that the whole room agrees that this would compel a customer or the press to investigate further, to start in a conversation, that project would not start. So you have to first of all get clarity about what's the point here, what's the appeal here, and really nail that. And only when you can nail that would you then investigate into the details. Mm-hmm.
Now, you talked about when you get that clarity right. One of the things that you talk a lot about, and I've seen on your website, and it's about irresistible clarity. It's about simplicity. It's about making that message really short. In fact, your podcast, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, your episodes are 2 minutes or less. I mean, it's the brevity of your blogs, your podcasts. First of all, super on brand with your ideas, very much on brand. But tell us a little bit more about that, this idea of irresistible clarity and communicating things very simply.
The only rule that I have come to appreciate as the only strict rule that there actually is in communication is that if they didn't get it, they didn't get it, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's always your responsibility. It's never the audience's fault. If they didn't get it, they didn't get it. There is really no use in arguing that you mentioned it on slide 13 or that you meant it slightly differently. They didn't get that. Maybe they weren't paying enough attention, but that only means that you weren't creating enough tension for them to pay attention. Mm-hmm. And so that's the first step in realizing that understanding is really our job, not the audience's job. Mm-hmm. So and making them see what we see is the door opener for more conversations and for their curiosity and for their engagement with our story. So that's really the point of trying to come up with really clear words for your ideas, to make them see what's so clear for yourself. Because they are not you. They don't know what you know. And for them to appreciate why your idea makes sense in their world, you need to make them see that. And that's your responsibility. And if that's super clear in a way that it becomes irresistible for them to come closer and look closer, and what is this thing really, and how is this built, and well, how does it look from behind? That's really excellence in communication to me.
You said something, create tension to get attention, something along those lines. Well, what is that? It almost sounded like this really great phrase and idea that you have.
I don't know whether I said that before in that exact way, but well, creating tension is actually a term that I borrowed from Seth Godin, who speaks a lot about creating tension in marketing. And so what is that tension for, right? It's to engage in a conversation, to engage deeper, to kind of drag them down into that rabbit hole and ever deeper and go into deeper conversations until we've kind of reached that point of no return where we've made them see so clearly what we wanted them to see in a way that they can't unsee that anymore. That, well, they might still be free to make that decision. We're not making the choice for them, but they cannot make that choice without the tension that we created by showing them the whole truth. This is how your world could look like with my idea in it. And so you're free to choose, but well, if you've done a good job and listened previously and created that thing based on the conversations that you've had with your customers, I mean, what is that decision going to look like, right? They would be fools not to agree.
You know, the other thing you said that I think is a really important idea for people to walk away with and take away is that, getting the attention of others or being understood is our responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the audience. And that's a big one because you gave a very specific example. Like maybe they didn't remember something from slide 13 when I talked about that earlier, maybe 30 minutes into the talk, and now we're an hour into it. And the fact that they didn't remember it, that's not their fault. It's on me to make sure that, I find a way to communicate that, or maybe remind them, or maybe I have to state that many times. But I think that's a really important idea, that it's our responsibility. And anytime we speak, whether it's pitching an idea, articulating it for the first few times, or presenting or speaking, whatever it might be, writing a book, anything, that is our responsibility. I think that's a big idea. Can you elaborate or talk more about that?
Well, I could speak for days about that because this is something that's really near and dear to my heart, because I've seen so many geniuses who almost refuse to make an impact because they have such a distaste for everything that even remotely smells like marketing, that they just can't make the impact that they would deserve to make. But what they fail to see is that it's not enough to care for your cause. You've got to care for the change too. And caring for the change means taking the audience, the customer, into account and playing the game of their attention. Because if they don't recognize us, if they can't pay attention, because we're so consumed with our take that everything needs to be correct and clear and complete, and we always want to tell them the full story and have them appreciate all the details. If that's our take, they're not going to pay attention. And so the others, the competitors with inferior ideas, inferior products, inferior execution will get their attention because they figured out that game. And so we can't make that impact. And that is not to say that we should play the same game as them, bullshit just as they do, promise the customers the blue from the skies. But tell them a true story that's better than theirs. But make it true and make a bold statement, make a bold promise that we actually care to keep, while the bullshitters only make bold promises that they don't care to make. But we need their attention. We need the clarity, and we need to own that they see what we need them to see. That, and if we don't take that responsibility, if we don't make that happen, we cannot make our change happen. And so it's no use that we care so much for the cause when the change can't happen.
You know, this is a mistake I've made many times when it comes to creating social content or, you know, being on social media over the years, where I thought that, hey, look, I put out what was an important insight, you know, a big insight with a big idea. And I felt like that was enough. It's almost like, you know, if I build it, they will come. And I thought, well, I've built this post, you know, they should come. But to your point, that's, you know, that's half the battle, maybe even less than half the battle. It's, you know, it's the marketing piece. It's the making sure that lands well, that resonates, that connects. And that starts with, of course, attention. If I can't even get their attention, well, then forget about understanding. We're not even going to get to that point. And so, and I'm starting to see this now over the last couple of years, that this is my responsibility. I learned this especially when I was writing my book, working with the editors, the editing team. They were the ones who really showed this to me, because they would point out, see the way you wrote this or this paragraph, that's really for you. That's not helping draw in your audience. That's something that you wanted to put in there, and it's distracting actually. And so it can take away from the really great insight that you have to share right after that. And so, you know, we have to really think about how we write these pieces. You know, they talked about we have to start the chapters with an engaging story. It's got to be a really good hook. We have to draw the reader in. Otherwise, they have no reason to commit to this chapter, and they can just skim it or skip it.
Yeah, and the point is that so the mistake is often that as a creator or as an engineer, we feel like we need them to see everything at once. So we throw at them everything at once, hoping that when we're done speaking, they've seen it all and they appreciate the full brilliance. But that's not how it works, and that's not how it needs to work. What works much better is if we take it one step at a time. If we recognize that the first sentence that we say or speak is not meant to give the complete picture, but is meant for them to want to hear the second sentence. And the purpose of that is to want them to make the third sentence. And so once we're at the 100th or the 1000th sentence in our book or in our speech, we may have given them the whole picture, the complete picture, but in a way that actually makes sense for them, in a way that engages them and that wants them to come closer and have that conversation with us.
Yes. You know, and it's interesting because when I'm speaking at an event, that's where I think a lot more about how do I get attention, and then how do I, of course, deliver something effectively, make it resonate, make it connect. And it's just, I've had this disconnect with how that applies to other forms of content or other products or other services. And I think what you just shared is a really big idea, and making sure that, again, it's about taking that ownership, owning that responsibility. That's part of the work to be done if we want to effectively teach or help others or communicate or whatever it might be that the ultimate goal is, or sell a product, you know, whatever it is. The responsibility is ultimately on us to not only capture that attention in the first place, but then navigate that experience, you know. And I love what you said about there's this tendency to want to give it all in one shot right up front at the beginning, when maybe, you know, there's a better way to space it out, spread it out, make it something that's more consumable. Yeah. Let's talk about listening, because everything that we're talking about here is so focused on the audience, right? Is getting to know our audience. And so I can't help but wonder, well, listening must be a key skill in communication then, in speaking, you know, which is interesting, because when you're thinking about becoming a speaker, you're probably, what are the best speaking techniques? What are the best ways to stand when I'm on stage? What are the best ways to share my words? Where do my hands go? We think about all of these things about the part where I'm communicating, but what about listening?
Yeah. Well, without listening, there is no speaking, I guess. So it's the very rare lucky guy who has a story that just pops out of nowhere and everyone wants to hear. I think the thing to appreciate is that audiences don't show up because of you, but because they hope that they learn something that has an impact on themselves. So if you look at the movies, like when we watch a great movie, it might be that we look at the hero. Let's pick one of my favorites, Rocky. Actually,
I love that one.
Rocky
too.
Rocky is that guy who has that huge potential but never gets to show his full potential, and who struggles with life and has this dream of, if only ever sometime the phone would ring and I would get my chance, my shot at the championship, I would show the world my potential. And that's what happens, right? And so what happens when we watch that movie is that we kind of look at Rocky, but it's in a way us who we see. Because we are Rocky too, right? We have that potential, right? And if only ever we got the chance to stand on that big stage, or to have that pitch to that huge venture capital firm, if only we ever get that phone call, we would show the world. And so it's the hero we look at, but it's us who we see. And that's in a way true for any kind of speech or most communication, that although we might speak about ourselves, our products, what the audience actually looks at is themselves and the way that our idea or our story has an impact on their lives. And maybe sometimes they even recognize themselves in that story. And so once you appreciate that it's never really about you, but always about them, you almost automatically want to find out more about them. You want to know who's actually sitting there. Yeah. Why did they show up? Why did they commit to spending 60 minutes of their life listening to me? What are their struggles? What do they strive for? And that's what you find out by having a conversation with them and actually listening to what they've got to say. Either in person or like you mentioned, just right before you get on stage, but ultimately or ideally even way before, right? First of all, by asking yourself that question. Sometimes you could be sitting in that audience and you could just give the answers yourself. Yeah. But I mean, it's become easier than ever. Just hop on social media. If you don't have a conversation partner to have an actual phone call with them, just hop on social media and try to figure out and listen to some of the conversations that are happening on topics. And so there are very many different ways of actually doing the listening. The important point is that you actually commit to that and start doing that and start to get clarity about what kinds of questions do I need to ask anyway.
That's a great distinction. The other types of listening, it's not just listening in a conversation. It could be listening to the conversations that are happening online. It could be, for me, a big part of listening is paying attention to how people move through an event. If I'm the organizer, I'm learning by watching how people are navigating. Why does everyone keep walking this way? And then they run into an obstacle. My gosh, that's a design issue. I could fix that. I don't have to ask them that. I'm listening to what I'm watching, the observation of them running into a problem every single time. And that's something we could fix. And this, one of the strategies that I use when I go to a speaking engagement is I always go early. So if, no matter what time I'm speaking at the event, I want to be there at the beginning. In fact, I always tell the organizers, when does the event start? If it's a multi-day event, like what's the first day? Because if you'll allow me, I'd love to hang out. I'd love to commit the 2 days or the 3 days. I want to get to know the people. And I always take advantage of that opportunity to connect with attendees, because then I get to listen more about, or even just being around them. To your point, I'm listening in. I'm at the networking event. I'm listening in on the conversations. I can hear very easily what are the topics that are important. What are the issues? What are the concerns? What's on their mind, so that I can hopefully take whatever I prepared and make some adjustments for it to connect a little bit better with who they are, what's on their mind right now, and what matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about your podcast and your blog. You're a content creator and obviously a great communicator in these nuggets, in this format, or in these two formats especially. Tell us a little bit more about your process, because some of our listeners are also considering becoming better at content creation and maybe doing more of that. And I always find it fascinating and interesting when I meet, or interview folks who are also content creators. Tell us a little bit more about your artistic process, if you will, your creation process.
Yeah, actually, it starts with what you just mentioned. I try to pay attention to what happens around me and what I notice happening in conversations, in communication, in speeches. So I try to pay attention and not just let the moments that give me a pause pass by, but actually take a pen and write it down, or take my digital notebook and make a small note in that. So I have a huge collection of those moments where I noticed something. I frequently will go through those and just try to make sense of what I've learned there. And then when something clicks and says, so that's something that I think could be valuable for my readers, I try to elaborate on that. I always strive for making one clear point. So I'm not the kind of creator that creates like huge articles and blog posts. So if you mentioned the 900 posts that are live on my blog, it's not like these are like very long articles. It's often very concise and to the point. And my goal is to actually capture that moment that I experienced there, and try to make one point that can give you a pause and make you reflect on one specific aspect of your communication or leadership, and try to have you reflect on that, and then either move on or try to adapt or try to pay attention to those situations too. And just doing that helps me to make more sense of communication for myself. So that's actually how and why I started to write that blog, is to make sense for myself. And then when I saw that resonates with people, that's when I invested more and tried to refine and things. And then at one point I thought, well, there might be an audio version of that, right? And that's kind of what my blog is. It's sort of the best of the blog, where I pick some of the posts that I think are particularly valuable, and kind of give people a different point of attachment to that, and that I just speak them, sometimes tweak them a little bit so that they're more suitable to the audio format, and put them on the Irresistible Communication Podcast.
Very cool. How long has the blog been out? When did you start the blog?
Well, there are two answers to that. I started blogging almost 16 years ago, or around 16 years ago.
Yep.
But that was as a German blog, and back then I blogged like twice a week or so. And for many years that was a German blog, but sometime during COVID, I think some 4 years ago, I switched both to English and daily blogging. And so that's how long The Art of Communicating is now running. Like almost 4 years now of daily blogging.
Very cool. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time, for your insights. I mean, I think that these ideas around communication, the strategies you shared, the points we've made in our conversation are going to be incredibly helpful to people who are making serious pivots, and especially into entrepreneurship, where communication is going to be key to drawing in potential customers, investors, future employees, whatever it might be. It's all going to come through communication at the end of the day, and that is going to be the key. And so to be able to talk to an expert, very helpful. And well, you got to the point on almost every question very quickly. So we covered a lot in a short amount of time. So thank you so much. Is there anywhere you'd like to point listeners, who want to maybe work with you? I know you work with entrepreneurs, you work with C-level leaders and executives. Where would you have people go?
I'd recommend to hop on my website. That's Michael Gerharz, Gerharz, one word, michaelgerharz.com. And there you find pointers to my advisory services and coaching programs. There's also the pointers to the blog, the podcast, the Leaders Light the Path manifesto. And if you're open to it, just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to follow your journey. Awesome. Very, very cool. Thank you so much for that. All of the links will be in the show notes. So if you're listening in and you want to find those links, just look in the description and you will find them there. Michael, thank you again so much for your time. Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the School of Reinvention podcast. Again, I'm your host, Roger Osorio. If you're ready to start your journey to reinvention and want to walk the path with others, visit www.rogerosorio.com and go to the School of Reinvention to check out for yourself how a community-based coaching platform can help you begin your next reinvention. You can also go to rogerosorio.com to purchase my new book, The Journey to Reinvention, and receive some exciting bonuses. Until next time, make your day great.